Panama, the nearest landmass in the Americas, has always held strategic significance. At just 50 miles wide, it forms a natural bridge between two continents, and a barrier between the Atlantic and Pacific. For centuries, merchants, empires, and explorers dreamed of slicing through this terrain, creating a shortcut for the world. Long before Europeans arrived, indigenous peoples understood the power of Panama. This is geography. They developed overland trails for trade, using rivers and portage trails to move goods between coasts. These early routes would later guide colonial roads, railways, and eventually the canal itself. In 1513, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa became the first European to see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas. After a grueling trek through swamps, mountains, and the forest, he reached a peak and named the distant sea Mar del Sur, the Southern Sea. This moment was monumental. For the first time, the two oceans were conceptually joined. The Spanish realized they stood at the brink of a transcontinental passage. A decade later, Charles V of Spain ordered the first serious study of building a canal across Panama. Engineers attempted to survey the rugged terrain, but the tools and knowledge of the time were inadequate. The idea was declared impractical, a dream ahead of its time. Even without a canal, Panama rose in prominence. By the 16th century, it became the linchpin of Spain's transcontinental empire. Gold and silver from Peru were carried across the isthmus by mule train, loaded onto galleons and shipped to Spain. Pirates stalked the coast, and fortresses rose to defend the treasure route. In one of history's most tragic financial failures, Scotland launched the Darien Scheme in 1698. Over 1,000 settlers hoped to create a trading colony across the isthmus. Ill-prepared and unsupported, the colony collapsed within a year. Disease, starvation, and Spanish hostility wiped it out. The economic ruin helped push Scotland into union with England. As industrialization reshaped the world, interest in the canal surged. The California Gold Rush of 1849 made the need for a shortcut urgent. Thousands rushed to reach the Pacific coast, many via Panama, braving the treacherous overland journey. By the mid-19th century, the need for a rapid connection between the oceans had reached a boiling point. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 triggered a mass migration westward. And for tens of thousands of prospectors, the fastest way to reach the Pacific was through Panama. But the journey was treacherous. Travelers would disembark on the Caribbean side, making a grueling trek across muddy trails and jungle-clogged terrain, then board a ship on the Pacific side. Bandits, disease, and unpredictable weather made the overland route perilous. Something had to change. That change would come in the form of steel rails. In 1850, the Panama Railroad Company broke ground on what would become the first transcontinental railway in the Americas. Over the next 5 years, American engineers, backed by New York financiers, undertook an audacious challenge, carving a path through one of the world's most inhospitable environments. The route spanned just 47.6 miles, but the cost in human life was staggering. Workers from the United States, Ireland, China, and especially the Caribbean toiled under brutal conditions. Estimates suggest that as many as 10,000 men died building the line. Followed by malaria, yellow fever, and exhaustion, for every rail laid, blood was spilled. Despite the hardships, the railroad was completed in 1855. Trains now ferried people and goods across the isthmus in mere hours, a journey that once had taken days or even weeks. Panama has become the vital artery between oceans, and global commerce surged. The railroad became one of the most profitable investments of the century. It enabled the movement of mail, gold, troops, and passengers with unprecedented speed. But it also revealed something else, that it was indeed possible to cross the isthmus by man-made means. The Panama Railroad will later serve as the blueprint, the logistical backbone for the canal itself. Its builders proved what could be achieved through planning, determination, and sacrifice. It laid the tracks not just for trains, but for the 20th century's most ambitious engineering marvel.
With the Suez Canal completed and celebrated, the world looked to its architect, Ferdinand de Lesseps. As a man who could do the impossible, his next challenge, to conquer the American tropics and carve a sea-level canal through the wild heart of Panama. Ferdinand de Lesseps wasn't an engineer. He was a diplomat and a visionary, but after completing the Suez Canal in 1869, he was hailed as a modern-day hero. Investors trusted him, nations admired him, so when he announced plans to build a canal in Panama, money poured in. Critics warned that Panama's terrain was nothing like the flat Egyptian desert, but Lesseps silenced dissent. Construction would begin and nothing would stop it.
Lieutenant Lucien Wise had already secured a concession from Colombia, who owed Panama at the time. The Universal Interoceanic Canal Company was formed in 1880 with de Lesseps at the helm. Thousands of investors, many of them ordinary French citizens, put their savings into the project.
From the beginning, the French were unprepared. The rains turned dirt into rivers of mud. The jungle was impenetrable. Massive machines sent from Europe were quickly swallowed by the environment. Workers labored with picks and shovels under suffocating heat and unrelenting tropical storms. The terrain resisted every effort. Worse yet, the workforce fell victim to diseases they didn't understand. Yellow fever and malaria became ruthless killers. Doctors didn't yet understand the role mosquitoes played in transmitting these diseases. Entire teams of workers, and even their supervisors, perished within weeks of arriving. Hospitals overflowed, morale crumbled. Jules Dingler, the project's chief manager, lost his wife and children to disease. He abandoned the effort in despair. One by one, French officials fled Panama. Engineer Philippe Benau-Varilla attempted to salvage the project. He urged a redesign, switching to a locked-based system. But it was too late. The project had already consumed hundreds of millions of francs. Investors demanded results, not revisions. In 1869, the company collapsed. Over 800,000 investors lost their savings, and the scandal rocked France. The Panama affair became one of the largest financial scandals of the 19th century. Ferdinand de Lesseps, his son, and Gustave Eiffel were put on trial. Their reputations were shattered. By the time the French abandoned Panama, an estimated 20,000 workers had died. The dream lay buried in tropical soil, its promise swallowed by disease, greed, and miscalculation. But the story didn't end there. The tools, the maps, and the infrastructure, and the hard-won lessons remained. Someone else would pick up where the French had failed.
Before the Americans could start their attempt on the Panama Canal, there was a matter of political maneuvering, or as some would call it, imperial engineering. When Colombia rejected the terms of the Teheran Treaty, which would have given the U.S. rights to build in Panama, President Theodore Roosevelt was outraged. The canal, he believed, was a matter of national destiny. Enter Philippe Benau-Varilla, a French engineer and former official of the failed French canal effort, who took it upon himself to secure American backing for Panamanian independence. Though he had not lived in Panama for years, Benau-Varilla negotiated directly with U.S. officials, promising them a new government would approve of the canal project. Behind closed doors, a plan was set in motion. On November 3rd, 1903, Panamanian nationalists, with U.S. support, declared independence from Colombia. The revolution was quick and bloodless. Colombian troops stationed nearby were blocked by the American warship, the USS Nashville, which just so happened to be in the port. In just 3 days, the Republic of Panama was internationally recognized by the United States. Colombia, humiliated and outraged, could do nothing to stop it. The act was seen by many as a classic case of gunboat diplomacy. Barely 2 weeks after independence, Benau-Varilla, still acting without direct Panamanian authority, signed the Hay-Benau-Varilla Treaty in Washington. It gained the United States control of a 10-mile-wide canal zone in perpetuity. In exchange, Panama received $10 million in an annual payment of $250,000. To President Roosevelt, it was a geopolitical masterstroke. He would later boast, "I took the isthmus." To Panamanians, it was a bitter pill. Independence gained, only to surrender sovereignty once again. The treaty would shape Panamanian-American relations for the next century, praised as a triumph of progress by some, and condemned as a violation of national dignity by others. The terrain posed a staggering challenge. Panama was a land of swamps, mountains, and torrential rainfall. At the heart of the isthmus stood the Continental Divide, a series of rocky ridges that rose like a spine from sea to sea. It wasn't just a ditch to be dug. It was an entire landscape to be reshaped. The Chagres River, the region's dominant waterway, was both a gift and a threat. It could flood unpredictably, swelling 20 feet in a matter of hours. Yet it was also the key to powering a lock-based canal. If controlled, it could become the canal's engine. Initial debates raged between those advocating a sea level canal, like the Suez, and proponents of a lock system that could accommodate the terrain. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt, after visiting the site himself, approved the lock design. It would lift ships over the mountains using chambers powered by gravity-fed water. The linchpin of the lock bay system was Gotten Dam, a colossal earthen dam that would tame the Chagres River and create Gotten Lake. Covering over 164 square miles, it would become the largest man-made lake in the world and form the main highway of the canal. To build the dam, thousands of workers hauled and dumped more than 17 million cubic meters of rock and clay. The weight of the dam itself would hold back the river, creating a reservoir with enough volume to operate the canal's locks. Next came the Clubra Cut, the most daunting section of the entire canal. This narrow corridor of the Continental Divide required excavation of an unimaginable scale. At its peak, over 6,000 men labored daily to cut through the mountain, but the earth wouldn't yield easily. Frequent landslides buried equipment, killed workers, and erased weeks of projects. The soil, loosened by tropical rains and blasted by dynamite, collapsed without warning. Engineers fought a constant battle not just to dig, but to keep what they dug from disappearing. To meet the demands of construction, American engineers introduced a new level of organization and mechanization. Miles of track were laid to carry away debris. Gigantic steam shovels, each operated by skilled crews, moved millions of cubic yards of earth. Logistic hubs and workshops were built from scratch. Chief engineer John Frank Stevens reorganized the entire project, bringing in refrigeration for food, sanitary housing, and a schedule that transformed chaos into clockwork. He laid the foundation, both literal and institutional, for the canal's success. But no amount of engineering could succeed without tackling the true killer, disease. Dr. William Gorgas launched a revolutionary sanitation campaign, draining swamps, oiling water surfaces to kill mosquito larvae, and screening windows. His efforts were met with skepticism, but they worked. Within a few years, yellow fever had been eradicated in the zone. Malaria rates had plummeted. For the first time, disease was a non-issue. The canal would have never been built without its workforce. Tens of thousands of laborers, most from the Caribbean, particularly Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, made the journey to Panama, chasing steady wages and economic hope. They arrived to find back-breaking work and an unforgiving caste system. Workers were divided into two groups, the gold roll and the silver roll. The gold roll was reserved for white American and European employees. They received higher pay, superior housing, quality medical care, and social amenities such as movie theaters and clubs. The silver roll, which included the majority of the Afro-Caribbean workers, received lower wages, lived in overcrowded and often unsanitary barracks, and were assigned the most physically demanding and dangerous tasks, from dynamiting the Clubra Cut to laying track in mosquito-infested swamps. Even beyond the workplace, the divide was total. Silver roll workers ate in separate mess halls, used different restrooms, and were denied access to many of the public spaces in the canal zone. But their labor kept the project moving forward. Yet their dignity was continually denied. The injustice sparked discontent. Labor strikes broke out in several years, with workers demanding better conditions and equal treatment. These movements were often suppressed by U.S. authorities, but they laid the groundwork for later resistance to American control in Panama. Between 1904 and 1914, over 70% of the canal's workforce was now composed of West Indian laborers. Their contributions are incalculable, yet for decades they were largely written out of the canal's heroic narrative. Only recently have their stories gained the recognition they did. Without the silver roll, there would be no Panama Canal. Their toil, resilience, and sacrifice carved a path through the mountains and swamps, and left a legacy that echoes far beyond the locks and lakes they helped build. On January 7th, 1914, the French crane boat Alexandre Lavallee made history. Completing the first full passage to the canal from Atlantic to Pacific, it was a quiet victory, unceremonious, but monumental. The official opening came on August 15th, 1914. The cement boat Ancon, piloted by Captain John A. Constantine, became the first official vessel to traverse the canal. Colonel George Washington Goethals, the canal's chief engineer and now its first governor, stood at the helm of the celebration. But the monument was overshadowed by global tensions. Just 2 weeks earlier, World War I had erupted in Europe. The world's attention turned to battlefields, not waterways. There was no grand international gathering, no flotilla of ships, only quiet pride in the beginning of a new era. With the canal open, the U.S. dissolved the Isthmian Canal Commission. In its place stood a new government for the canal zone. an unincorporated U.S. territory governed exclusively by Americans. Goethals was named governor, wielding sweeping authority over this 10-mile wide corridor through Panama. The Canal Zone had its own schools, police, post offices, and even its own currency. For American citizens, it was a model community. Neat, orderly, efficient. For Panamanians, it was a wall. The impact was immediate and profound. Trade routes were redrawn. A ship traveling from New York to San Francisco saved nearly 8,000 miles by going through Panama instead of around Cape Horn. Naval strategy shifted too. The US can now move fleets through the Atlantic and Pacific in a matter of days, a geopolitical advantage that cemented America's emergence as a global power. Within its first year, more than 1,000 ships transited the canal. Global commerce would never be the same. Yet behind the celebration loomed a staggering human cost. During the American phase of construction, over 5,600 workers died, many from disease, accidents, and landslides. Including the French period, the death toll climbs to over 25,000. Most of the fallen were Afro-Caribbean laborers, whose names were not recorded, whose graves were not marked, whose families were left without recognition or compensation. Their sacrifices were essential, and for far too long, invisible. Goethals remained Canal Zone governor until 1917, overseeing its earliest operations. He emphasized reliability and discipline, building a bureaucracy that would last for decades. The canal wasn't just built, it was maintained, refined, and defended. From its earliest days, it was treated as a cornerstone of American global power. A passage has been carved through a continent, uniting oceans, empires, and people, but this new artery of global trade also came with new tensions. In Panama, resentment simmered. The question of sovereignty was not over. It had only just begun. The Panama Canal was built. But for whom? While ships sailed smoothly between oceans, tension on land began to boil. For the people of Panama, the canal symbolized prosperity and pride, but also exclusion, injustice, and foreign occupation. Following its completion, the Canal Zone became an American enclave, a 10-mile wide strip of U.S. jurisdiction cutting through the center of Panama, governed by American law, patrolled by American troops, and run by American administrators. It was a foreign country within a country. The Canal Zone had its own schools, stores, police forces, and hospitals, all reserved for Americans and their families. Streets bore its names from the United States, and the stars and stripes flew above every official building. Panamanians needed permits to enter, and many were forbidden from living or working there unless employed under strict conditions. To many, the canal felt less like national pride and more like occupation. The racial and class segregation established during the canal construction continued into the operation. Afro-Caribbean workers and their families remained on site on the silver roll, earning less and living in segregated quarters. Their children attended inferior schools, and their access to healthcare and housing was restricted. American officials and their families enjoyed a privileged lifestyle. Air-conditioned homes, movie theaters, golf courses, and commissaries stocked with goods unavailable to most Panamanians. The divide was not just economic, it was cultural, racist, and deeply institutionalized. Panama's sovereignty has been compromised. Its economic lifeline was operated and controlled by outsiders, and resentment simmered. By the mid-20th century, a growing wave of Panamanian nationalism took hold. Students, intellectuals, and working-class citizens demanded equality, dignity, and a renegotiation of the canal treaties. In 1947, the U.S. attempted to secure more military bases in Panama through a secret agreement with the local government. When the deal was exposed, Panamanians erupted in protest. Tens of thousands filled the streets. The agreement was quickly canceled, a rare but decisive victory. This moment marked the beginning of Panama's modern resistance movement, one rooted not in violence but in civic action, education, and a fierce sense of national pride. The tipping point came in January 9th, 1964, now remembered as Martyrs' Day. Panamanian students marched into the Canal Zone to demand their national flag be flown alongside the American one, as been promised by a 1963 agreement. Tensions escalated when the Panamanian flag was torn during a confrontation with American students. Riots broke out. Violence spread across Panama City and the Canal Zone. 21 Panamanians and 4 Americans were killed. Hundreds were injured. The incident shocked the hemisphere and marked the beginning of a new era in U.S.-Panama relations. For many Panamanians, it was not just about a flag. It was about respect, identity, and the right to be treated as equals in their own country. Out of the unrest rose a charismatic military leader, General Omar Torrijos. In 1968, he led a coup that overthrew the Panamanian government. But like many military rulers, Torres focused not on repression, but on reform. He promised to restore dignity to Panama's poor, to fight inequality, and above all, reclaim the canal. Torrijos positioned himself as a voice for Latin American sovereignty, drawing support not only at home, but throughout the developing world. He nationalized industries, invested in education and housing, and pushed for agrarian reform. But the canal was central to his vision. To him, the canal symbolized everything Panama has lost and everything it could gain. The struggle for control was no longer about shovels and cement. It was about dignity, justice, and national identity. The canal had divided a country. Now a movement was rising to bring it home. Not with dynamite, but with diplomacy, persistence, and pride. The winds of change were blowing. For decades, Panama has pushed against the shadow of a foreign flag. But in the 1970s, a window opened, and two leaders stepped forward to redefine history. General Omar Torrijos didn't just protest the canal's foreign control. He made it his mission to reclaim it. On the world stage, he appealed to a global audience, casting the issue not just as a national grievance, but as a symbol of colonialism. Torrijos toured Latin America and Europe, rallied support for the non-aligned movement, and called out the United States in international forums. He spoke not as a general, but as a patriot, a father, and a man unwilling to let his country remain divided. In the United States, the mood was shifting too. After the Vietnam War and Watergate scandal, Americans questioned old doctrines of dominance. It was in this atmosphere that Jimmy Carter was elected, a president who believed in human rights, diplomacy, and fairness. Carter understood that holding on to the canal at the expense of the Panamanian sovereignty was no longer sustainable or moral. He made resolving the Panama an issue a cornerstone of his foreign policy. Years of difficult negotiations followed. At stake was not just a canal, but the very symbol of two nations' identities. Torrijos demanded full control. U.S. officials demanded guarantees of neutrality. Back and forth they went from Washington to Panama City to Geneva. Through it all, Torrijos remained determined. He told Carter, "This is the only way I can die peacefully, knowing I have returned dignity to my people." On September 7th, 1977, in Washington, D.C., the two men signed a pair of historic documents. The first, the Panama Canal Treaty, guaranteed that Panama would regain full control of the canal by December 31st, 1999. The second, the Neutrality Treaty, promised the canal would remain open and secure to ships of all nations, even after the transfer. It was more than a treaty. It was a handshake across history. In the United States, the agreement sparked a firestorm. Many Americans, especially conservatives, believed the canal was a sovereign U.S. asset, bought, built, and owned. Ronald Reagan famously declared, "We bought it, we built it, we paid for it, we're going to keep it." The Senate battle was fierce. Treaty opponents framed the agreement as a weakness, betrayal, even treason. But Carter fought back, one vote at a time. In March 1978, after months of debates, both treaties were ratified, each by a razor-thin margin. Panamanians flooded the streets in celebration. For them, it was the culmination of decades of struggle. But for the U.S., the moment passed more quietly. There were no parades, no victory laps, only the beginning of a new relationship with the two unequal partners, learning to coexist. The treaties set in motion were a phased transition. Over the next 2 decades, Panama gradually assumed more control. U.S. bases were dismantled, Panamanian technicians trained, and joint commissions oversaw canal security and administration. By the early 1990s, the shape of the future was clear. Panama would soon hold the keys, and the world would be watching. The Torrijos-Carter treaties did not just transfer a waterway. They restored dignity, affirmed sovereignty, and reshaped hemispheric diplomacy. The canal was no longer the property of an empire, but the responsibility of a nation. And soon, Panama would rise to meet that responsibility. As the world welcomed a new millennium, Panama welcomed something greater: control over its destiny. On December 31st, 1999, nearly a century after the canal's birth, the United States formally handed the Panama Canal over to the Republic of Panama. It was more than a ceremony. It was the fulfillment of a promise and the closing of a long chapter of foreign oversight. The road to the handover was long and carefully managed. Over 2 decades, Panama gradually assumed more control, not only of operations, but of maintenance, security, and administration. American engineers trained Panamanian counterparts. Military bases were shut down and replaced by civilian infrastructure. Bit by bit, Panama prepared to take the helm. At the final ceremony, Panama's president, Mireille Moscoso, stood before the world and declared that Panama had reclaimed what was rightfully hers. The U.S. flag was lowered, and the Panamanian flag rose to the sound of national pride. It marked the first time since 1903 that Panama fully controlled all of its national territory. Control of the canal passed to a new autonomous agency, the Autoridad del Canal de Panama, or ACP. Governed by a board of Panamanian officials and engineers, it was structured to be efficient, apolitical, and globally competitive. Doubts remained, however. Could a small developing country manage one of the most complex and strategically important pieces of infrastructure in the world? The answer came quickly. Not only did the ACP prove competent, it proved exemplary. Operations remained seamless, revenue increased, and Panama's economy began to flourish, fueled by the billions generated through canal. This income supported roads, hospitals, education, infrastructure projects across the country. The canal had finally become a true national asset. But with sovereignty came reflection. Panama began to acknowledge the full human history of the canal, especially the role of Caribbean laborers, long overlooked in official narratives. Memorials were built, stories recorded. Education reform ensured that future generations would know not just who managed the canal, but who built it. The canal became more than a trade route. It became a cultural symbol, woven into Panama's national identity. It represented what the country had endured, achieved, and reclaimed. And internationally, the world took note. Panama had proven with determination and preparation, even the most powerful assets could be transferred peacefully and, more importantly, successfully. From conquest to cooperation, from conflict to control, the story of the canal was now fully Panamanian. A story of reclamation, remembrance, and national rebirth. With the canal fully under Panamanian control, a new challenge emerged: how to adapt a 20th century marvel to a 21st century world. Global shipping was changing, and Panama had to keep up, or risk being left behind. By the early 2000s, a new class of vessel was dominating global trade: post-Panamax. These ships carried more cargo, but were too large to fit within the original locks of the Panama Canal. Shipping routes began shifting. The canal's competitive edge and Panama's economic engine faced a critical threat. The country stood at a crossroads. In 2006, Panama held a national referendum to approve of a monumental expansion of the canal. It would involve constructing an entirely new set of locks capable of handling the largest vessels in the world. The campaign sparked passionate debate. Supporters have highlighted jobs, growth, and sovereignty. Opponents worried about corruption, environmental damage, and debt. But the people spoke, with over 75% voting in favor. Construction began in 2007 on the largest infrastructure project in Panama's history. Engineers excavated millions of cubic meters of earth. New water-saving basins were designed. Concrete for lock chambers was mixed on-site by the ton. It was a feat of modern engineering, but also a test of Panama's institutional strength. Unlike the original canal, the expansion was designed with sustainability in mind. The new locks use 7% less water per transit, despite handling ships more than twice the size. Panama implemented strict environmental controls, reforested affected areas, and engaged with international consultants to limit ecological impact. The expansion was not about more ships. It was about smarter stewardship. After nearly a decade of work, the expanded canal officially opened on June 26, 2016. The Chinese vessel COSCO Shipping Panama made the first historic journey through the new locks, a symbol of Panama's new place in the global order. Dignitaries, engineers, workers, and citizens gathered in celebration. It was not just a technical success, it was a national triumph. The expansion more than doubled the canal's cargo capacity. Revenue surged. Panama's ports, including Colon and Balboa, were upgrading into regional logistic hubs. The canal became a vital connector in east-west trade, strengthening ties between Asia and the Americas. For Panama, it reinforced its identity as a bridge between continents, economies, and eras.
The Panama Canal is often celebrated as one of the world's greatest engineering marvels, but beneath its triumphs lies a story of contradiction and a legacy marked not only by achievement, but by exploration, inequality, and consequence. The environmental impact of the canal has been long-lasting. While the Gutan Lake was formed, entire ecosystems were submerged. Forests vanished, villages were displaced, and endemic species were pushed to the brink. Will you shut the hell up? Today, the canal faces new threats. Climate change has intensified droughts, reducing the water available for lock operations. As the rainy seasons become less predictable, canal admirers must constantly balance ship traffic with reservoir sustainability.
To combat these challenges, the ACP has launched water saving initiatives, reforestation programs, and expanded hydrological research, but environmental pressures will only grow, and the canal's future depends on how Panama responds. The canal generates over $2 billion annually, contributing a significant share to Panama's national budget. Yet the prosperity it promises remains uneven. In Panama City, luxury apartments rise along the waterfront. Meanwhile, in provinces like Darien and Veragua, communities still lack paved roads, clean water, and reliable electricity. While the canal belongs to the nation, many Panamanians feel as it only benefits the few, not the many. Equity remains an unresolved question. The Panama Canal is no longer just a trade route, it's a geopolitical prize. The US views it as vital to hemispheric defense, while China's economic footprint has grown through shipping contracts, loans, and regional investments. Panama's 2017 decision to sever ties with Taiwan and embrace Beijing added fuel to the rivalry. While Panama asserts its neutrality, navigating these relationships will be critical to preserving its independence and global reputation. In an increasingly digital world, the canal systems have become targets. A successful cyber attack could paralyze trade, damage Panama's economy, and ripple across the globe. The ACP has invested heavily in cybersecurity, partnering with international experts to fortify its digital infrastructure. Still, with stakes this high, vigilance is essential. Owning the canal is more than a privilege, it's a burden of stewardship. Panama must juggle efficiency with fairness, profit with preservation, and sovereignty with diplomacy. Its success story is not yet complete. It's a living system, one shaped not only by geography and engineering, but by choices still being made. The Panama Canal is more than a route through a continent. It's a mirror, reflecting both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of human cost. To understand its legacy, you must remember all of it and use that memory to shape what comes next. To Panamanians, the canal is not simply a passageway. It is a symbol of pride, perseverance, and self-determination. For generations who once watched it from the margins, it has become a centerpiece of national life. It appears in classrooms, songs, art, and everyday language. Tourists visit to admire the mechanics, but Panamanians visit to remember. The story of the canal is passed down like an heirloom wisdom. Grandparents recount the noise of dynamite at the Kluber cut. Teachers highlight the bravery of Martyrs' Day. Students walk the same bridges once close to their ancestors. Each lock, each bolt, and each rail is part of a collective memory, a bridge between the past and the future. The communities surrounding the canal are as diverse as the ships that pass through it. Canal towns, once defined by foreign hierarchy, have become spaces of cultural blending, where Panamanian, Caribbean, American, Asian, and indigenous influences converge. More than 140 maritime routes and over 160 countries rely on the Panama Canal. Every year moves hundreds of millions of tons of cargo, from soybeans to smartphones. In a world strained by pandemic disruptions, supply chain delays, and political instability, the canal is a rare constant, a slender lifeline in an uncertain era. But Panama knows that constancy requires evolution. The canal is not standing still. From AI-driven traffic optimization to hybrid electric tugboats, the ACP is embracing innovation to stay ahead of the curve. Sustainability has become more than a goal. It's a responsibility. The next era of the canal will be measured not in tons or tolls, but how it balances trade with the planet. A new generation is rising, born from after the handover. Raised in the shadow of sovereignty, these young Panamanians are more connected, more aware, and more determined to ensure the canal reflects the values of their future. Their vision is bold, a canal that is green, just, inclusive, a true engine of national equity. Where oceans meet, stories merge. The story of Panama and its canal are not finished. It is still being written, every day, by the people who now own it. Not just a line between seas, but a lifeline between generations. Not just a channel, but a testament. Hey, thank you for watching. This might have taken me till 1 in the morning of the day it's due, so hopefully you guys like it. Peace!